Sunday night and Sunday we do Parsha. The Mashiach has to come now.
Amen.
But now it's Parshas Bo. It's doing Parshas Bo. As you know, Parshas Va'era has 7 makas, and Parshas Bo has 3 makas. I just want to throw this out as a little bit of an introduction, mamish a tiny vart of an introduction, which is the Chumash is an eternal book. The Chumash is God's wisdom. So the record of the Torah, of course, it's historic. These stories happened. But the record of the Torah is far more than just events that happened. The record of the Torah includes a message to all of history. It's a message that explains the Eibishter's relationship with the world. And on the most down-to-earth level, mamish, on the most down-to-earth level, if you want to understand the message of the 10 makas, Parshas Va'era and Parshas Bo, the message of the 10 makas is that the Eibishter has many tools at his disposal. Hashem has many tricks up his sleeve by which he can and will and does and will manage the world. And one of those tricks is miracles. In other words, the story of the 10 makas is not a story of something that happened 3,300 and so many years ago, that Hashem wanted to get Yidden out of Mitzrayim, he took him out of Mitzrayim and Asar makas. The story of the 10 makas is a message. The message is that when Hashem wants us to see him, one of the most direct ways for Hashem to show himself to the world is through the use of miracles. This is a theme which recurs throughout history. It happens over and over again, that when the Eibishter uses miracles to reveal himself. The Rebbe himself, who was a miracle worker of historic level, the Rebbe performed miracles. Every single dollar was a nest. The Rebbe performed miracles in an unbelievable way. And there are not thousands, there may be millions of events, supernatural events that the Rebbe was involved with a few words. It's mamish unbelievable. Once had an argument with the Frierdiker Rebbe, which is a very unusual thing, where the Frierdiker Rebbe told the Rebbe, after a whole conversation, that miracles are not Chabad. Miracles is other Chasidus, Chagas. Chabad is into something deeper. And the Rebbe wrote to his father-in-law, the Rebbe wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe, that maybe in the previous generation it was that way. Today Chabad needs miracles. Or as the Lubavitcher cynics likes to say, Halavai Poilish, Halavai, we should be Chagas Chasidim, as opposed to being something else. But the Rebbe performed unbelievable miracles. And the Rebbe, a tzaddik performs miracles for all kinds of reasons. Tzaddikim perform miracles to help people. But in the end, tzaddikim perform miracles to make it easier for us to relate to Hashem. The nisim and the neflois of a tzaddik make the Eibishter realer for us. That's how this works. And that's the story of Parshas Va'era and Parshas Bo. You have the 10 makas, they're fantastic events. Huge miracles. According to Rashi, each miracle lasted 7 days. And the point and purpose of these miracles, besides everything else, is the world should see the Eibishter. The world should learn about the Eibishter's power. And the world should decide that when the Eibishter wants something, we should cooperate, because otherwise there's going to be a very, very, very high cost. This is the story of the Torah. And therefore, the 10 makas, besides for being a story that happened historically at a certain time, in a certain place, the 10 makas are poshet, a precursor, they're an insight into the Eibishter's relationship with the world. And the Rebbe spoke once, Nasicha, that if you want to bring a person closer to Chassidus, miracles help. If you want to bring a person to the Eibishter, to Yiddishkeit, to Chassidus, miracles help, but you cannot make a whole Chassidus out of miracles. Miracles is just the appetizer. It's the entree. It's the before. After you see the miracles, then you have to get involved with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to learn, you have to daven, you have to serve him, you have to serve Hashem Derech HaChasidus. So the miracles set the stage. They bring us closer to the Eibishter, and after the miracles, we have to move on to more meaningful things. Go ahead.
So the Rebbe was pro-miracles?
The Rebbe was very pro-miracles. And he certainly practiced what he preached.
Frierdiker Rebbe changed his mind?
Oh, the Frierdiker Rebbe, I don't know. It's so interesting. The Rebbe wrote a letter to the Frierdiker Rebbe about this. and then for himself wrote another page of notes explaining why he disagrees with the Frierdiker Rebbe. It's very unusual for the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbe to disagree. And besides for the letter which the Rebbe wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe, in which he shows him his objection, the Rebbe wrote notes for himself as a supplement to that, explaining why he held that in our generation there's a great need for miracles. The truth of the matter is the Frierdiker Rebbe had no shortage of miracles. Frierdiker Rebbe performed many, many miracles. But the Rebbe used miracles in an extraordinary way, mamish, in an unbelievable way, an extraordinary way. And again, the point of the miracles is not just the miracles, the point of the miracles is it's a message. I'm here, I'm here. And these things happen today every day. These things happen today every day. Shluchim have stories with dreams and not with dreams, where you Pashat experience. I was in oil this morning with my wife, and a few women were there. They didn't look very particularly frum. And they walk out of the oil, and one lady says to the other two women that whenever I come here, on the way out I walk over to the screen and I watch the screen, and sometimes I get the answers to what I wrote in the oil. And the Rebbe is wishing somebody a happy birthday, and that's exactly why they came. So one of those two women gave out loud, as a curse, as one of the Dal Shemis Midrashim, the words, the 4-letter words. She couldn't believe it, because the lady just told her that sometimes they come over here and you get the answer, and the Rebbe tells, happy birthday, and she came for her birthday, so she let out an expletive. It wasn't exactly appropriate, but this was her. It was so it happened so fast. But as this woman is saying this to her, it shows up on the screen, so she reacted in a way that was without what's the word? It wasn't rehearsed. She didn't have a chance to practice before she let it out. She let it fly. But miracles are very, very important, and that's why these stories are written in the Chumash. It's the 10 Makkos are not written in the Chumash just to tell us that story. No way. The 10 Makkos are written in the Chumash to tell us part of how Hashem relates to the world. But it's only a beginning. After 10 Makkos comes 10 Commandments. And the point of the miracles is supposed to encourage us to be Jews, and that's the end story, end of the game. Now, one of the 10 Makkos is Makkos Choshech. That's the plague of darkness. Hashem, in Chumash, there's not even a warning, there's not even a warning. You don't even have Hashem comes to Moshe, tells Moshe, go tell Pai there's going to be darkness. Darkness just comes. If you've ever studied the 10 Makkos, there's a pattern. The first Makkah, Hashem says to Moshe, meet him by the river. The second Makkah, Hashem tells Moshe, meet him in the palace. The third Makkah, there's no warning. The fourth Makkah, Hashem says, meet him by the river. The fifth Makkah, Hashem says, go to the palace, Boyel Pare. The sixth Makkah, there's no warning. The seventh Makkah, Hashem says, go meet him by the river. The eighth Makkah, it says, go meet him in the palace. The ninth Makkah, which is Choshech, there's no warning. And the 10th Makkah, Pare calls Moshe and says, if I ever see you again, I'm going to kill you. And Moshe says, don't worry, you're never going to see me again. I got one more coming, and the show's over, party's over. Makas B'chedis. But it's very interesting. So Makas Chosh, according to the Chumash, it's not really a warning. There's different opinions in the Rishonim how that works. I'm hoping one day to do a class on it, but that's not for now. There's darkness for 7 days. 3 days, and 1 day. Obviously, for the Makkah to end, Pari had to be able to summon Moshe Rabbeinu, which means, at least according to some of us, at the very, very end of the Makkah actually got a little bit easier. But according to the Chumash, the first 3 days were not so bad, and the second 3 days were much worse, and then the 7th day, apparently the Makkah was lighter, so Pari was able to summon Moshe Rabbeinu and say, you got to get rid of the darkness. The first 3 days was dark. Leiro ishes ocha, they couldn't see one another. The second 3 days was like, they couldn't move. The darkness took on a thickness, it became like a heaviness, like a physical weight. And the Rashi says if you were sitting, you couldn't stand. If we were standing, they were just completely frozen in their space. And again, you have to assume that on the 7th day, and some of the Mefarshim make reference to this, the darkness got light enough for Pari to be able to summon Moshe Rabbeinu and tell them, please, just get rid of the Makkah and go. So Moshe gets rid of the Makkah, and Pari says, no, I'm not letting you go. And then you have Makkah's B'chedis. But there's a pasuk in this sequence that our Rebbe would quote all the time, and I think it's very important for us to hear this. I'm going to finish the class tonight with this point of the Rebbe's, but I'm just going to, before I even start the class, I just want to make a statement, okay? We're Lubavitcher Chassidim. You don't got to drink the Kool-Aid, okay? You really don't. You can be a Misnagid, you can be a Bobave, you can be a, I don't know, a Chabad light, a Chabad middleweight, a Chabad heavyweight, whatever you want to be. Do whatever you want. It's like a friend of mine once told me cynically that Gimel Tammuz is Independence Day. You do whatever you want. But one thing you can't do is you can't change the Rebbe. You can do whatever you want, but the Rebbe is the same. What the Rebbe said, what the Rebbe says, what the Rebbe meant, what the Rebbe means are constant. It's the two of the wilst. But don't tell yourself I'm a good chassid and then spin whatever you want becomes the Rebbe's words. That's it's unbecoming. It's really just better rebel against the Rebbe than try to spin the Rebbe's words and make them work for you, because that's hypocrisy. That's stupid. And there are certain ideas in the Rebbe's lexicon that we forget over time. Really, we forget over time. And because of that, we become less and less in the image of what the Rebbe's Chassidim are supposed to be. If I had to point to one character trait that Chassidim are suffering from because they're being influenced by the world rather than being influenced by the Rebbe's thinking, it's positivity. It's central to the Rebbe's way of life. Joy, positivity, look at the world as a garden, as the Rebbe said in Yud Shvat. And when we become, quote, instead of positive, realistic, we become very realistic people because we read the newspapers and we know what's going on in the world. We are stealing from ourselves our own Hasidus. We are stealing from ourselves our own Hasidus. We can do it. Independence Day, Tuva de Wilst. But if you want to be a Lubavitcher, you got to do what the Rebbe says. And I mentioned this in an earlier class also once before. The Rebbe said that we're holding at the threshold of Mashiach. And the Rebbe further said that in the threshold of Mashiach, Jewish people begin to see the light of Geula in the fact that their lives are better now than they were in earlier periods of Galus. So people come to me and tell me that some rabbi came along and said there's going to be another Holocaust, Rahman al-Assad, and he says it in the name of the Rebbe on top of everything else. Or another guy comes along and says that some other there's more anti-Semitism than ever. A guy told me he's leaving Canada, moving to America because Canada is becoming socialist. And he's a great Mishachist. What kind of Mishachist are you? The Rebbe said at the end of Galus, Jewish people are doing better than ever before. What are you running away? And one of the key psukim that the Rebbe quoted to assert this position, that as we get close to Mashiach, the lives of the Jewish people improve materially, is in our parsha. By makas choshech, by the plague of darkness, and that's the topic of tonight's class. All the Jewish people have light in their habitation in Galus. I heard this from the Rebbe. If I say 50 times, I don't think it's an exaggeration. In the letzte Tag und the Goyim von Galus, he used to say it after more than once in the Fabrengen. In the last days and hours of Galus, before Chas v'Shalom, Mashiach comes, is already lichtig. It's illuminated for the Jewish people. And the lives of the Jewish people are improving every day more and more as we get closer to the Geula. This is the position of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now you don't got to agree with him, but you can change what he said. Okay, and I, Baruch Hashem, the Kool-Aid is still in my system. There's a lot of people trying to blow cold air on it. But the Revaila, I am still brainwashed, and I hope to be brainwashed. And if I can brainwash you, it will be the greatest accomplishment of my life. The greatest thing a teacher can do to his students in Lubavitch is teach his students to think like the Rebbe thinks. Not just to do like the Rebbe says to do, to think like the Rebbe thinks. Because the Rebbe's thinking is the basis for the whole way of life of Chabad. Practically, actionably. And if you think like a depressed person, and you act like a Lubavitcher, don't work. The motivation to be a Lubavitcher chassid comes from these attitudes, and one of the foundational attitudes is the positivity, and one of the biggest sources of the positivity is tonight's class. That the Pasuk says that there was a plague of darkness, and the plague was so dense that for the first 3 days they couldn't see, and for the second 3 days they couldn't move. And then the Pasuk says, the Jewish people had light in their place of habitation. The Jewish people had light where Mitzrayim had darkness. So there's a whole bunch of different interpretations. So there's a handful of different interpretations of the Farshim. Well, what does it mean? The Jewish people, there were 10 Makkahs. When the Mitzrayim had Makkahs Dam, the Jews didn't have Makkahs Dam. When the Mitzrayim had Makkahs Fadeh, the Jews didn't have Makkahs Fadeh. When the Mitzrayim had Makkahs Although the Rebbe has sichas, it's implicit that the first three makas may have affected the Yidden as well. But for sure, from Orev, where the Jewish people lived, v'samti fedus ben Amiyah ben Amecha, where the Jewish people lived in Goshen, there was no makas. And here it says, during makas choshech, just like all the other makas affected Mitzrayim, except for where the Jewish people lived, the pasuk says, the Jewish people had light in their places of habitation. So some of the Mefarshim ask, it's a redundant statement. We already know that if the Eibishter brought makas on Mitzrayim, and he brought the same makas on Yidden, the makas defeat the purpose. The whole point is Mitzrayim suffers and Jews don't suffer. So it's self-understood that when Mitzrayim has a makas choshech, Yidden have light. Why does the pasuk have to state that even though the Mitzrayim had darkness, the Yidden had light? It's a redundancy. It's obvious. It's logical. It makes sense. Hashem is bringing a makkah in the Mitzrayim because they're holding the Jewish people captive. So the Mitzrayim have the makkah, not the Yidden. Why does the pasuk have to say it? There's a number of different thoughts. One of them is that the Eibishter wanted the Mitzrayim to see that Yidden have light. Part of the makkah that the Mitzrayim experienced is the Yidden would walk in and out of their homes. And it says another Midrash, but the reason Yidden walked in and out of the homes of the Mitzrayim was they wanted to see their wealth, so that later they could borrow it, as we all know the story. But during makas choshech, they could have taken it for free. They didn't. They borrowed it. But when a Yid walked into a Mitzri's house, the Mitzri saw that the light came in with the Yid. And the Mitzri saw that when the Jew left, the light left with him. In other words, it wasn't enough that the Mitzrayim had darkness. Part of the makkah was that they saw that they have darkness and that the Yidden don't. Because the Eibishter wanted the Mitzrayim to see that the Eibishter is able to make a separation. And the Midrash brings the pasuk, by Kriyas Yamsuf, which would be a couple of weeks later than makas choshech. So there was, the Mitzrayim are chasing the Jews. The cloud went between the Jewish people and the Mitzrayim. So there was the Anan, the cloud, and because there was a cloud separating the Jews and the Egyptians, on the Egyptian side there was darkness. And on the Jewish side there was light. So the simple meaning of those words is that the Mitzrayim had darkness because the cloud blocked the light. The Jewish people had light because of the Amud HaOna, because the pillar of fire. That's the Pashut Taich. But there's a Chassidus that says that there is a very, very unique concept in Kabbalah and Chassidus which is called HaChoshech Atzmei Yod, that the darkness itself should shine. Not that there's light in the darkness, that the darkness itself shine. And the implication of this medrash is that during makas choshech, Mitzrayim couldn't see, but they could see that the Yidden could see, but the Yidden were seeing with the same choshech that Mitzrayim couldn't see, the Yidden were able to see, because for the Yidden the darkness itself shone. It's one of the meanings of this here pasuk. Another meaning of the pasuk is that Mitzrayim had darkness by day and by night, obviously, right? Mitzrayim had darkness by day and by night. It wasn't only at night that it was dark, but there was also night. So he teaches l'chol b'nei Yisrael ha'yor b'mei shveisam, just like Mitzrayim had darkness by day and by night, Yidden had light by day and by night. It wasn't only that the Yidden's life continued as normal. By day the sun came up, at night the sun went down. But as Mitzrayim suffered darkness day and night, l'chol b'nei Yisrael ha'yor b'mei shveisam means that the Jewish people experienced light even during the night. Which means that during these days of choshech, let's say the last 3 days of makas choshech, days 4, 5, and 6, the situation of the world was like Adam and Chava before the original sin. When Adam and Chava were created on Friday afternoon, there was a special light that we were able to see from one end of the world to the next, which did not require the sun. And that light never went out. But when Adam and Chava did the Aveda of Chet Eitz Hadas, so that light went away. And that's one of the reasons why Matzah Shabbos we make a fire and we say Beinim Eid HaEish, because until Matzah Shabbos there was no need for fire, because there was no darkness, there was no sun necessarily, but the light did not go down even at night until the Chet Eitz Hadas. Kum Tachois, it comes out that the Yidden in Mitzrayim found themselves in the Ma'amid HaMatzev that when you say that at night there was also Lichtigkeit, that means the light that they were experiencing was similar to the light that existed before the original sin, when there became a need for the light only from the sun because the light from the creation itself was missing. Another pirush is, and this is sort of a simpler pirush, is that, and you'll see soon that Rebbe is going to disagree with this, that the rule was that the Makkahs happened in Mitzrayim, except in Goshen. When the Jewish people lived in Goshen, there was no Makkah. So some of the Mefarshim say, so the Midrashim say, what is the meaning of these words, that not only did Yidden have light where they lived in Goshen, but the Yidden had light also where the Mitzrayim were sitting in darkness. And some of the Mefarshim say this was an exception. Makkah's Choshech was different than any other Makkah. If you were a Yid in Mitzrayim, when Makkah's Orev came, right? Orev was wild animals, and they ran through the streets and they killed anybody outside. The Yidden lived in Goshen. The animals did not cross the border from Mitzrayim to Goshen. They knew the wall. V'samti v'dus. I'm going to show a wonder. There's nothing that's going to happen to the Jews. Whatever Jew wandered into Mitzrayim, he left Goshen, went to Mitzrayim. So the wild animals were told to know this is a Jew, don't eat him. Lav davke. If you wanted to protect from the Makkah, you stayed in Goshen. And the same as many of the Makkahs. I'm not saying all, but many of the Makkahs, as long as the Jews stayed where they were, there was no Borod in Goshen, there was no David in Goshen, there was no Shchin in Goshen, there was no Orev in Goshen, there was no Arba in Goshen. The rest of the time was being destroyed by plagues, and Goshen was scot-free. But if a Jew... they were scared they were going to Taiba. Why did the Jews... Okay, interesting question, and for right now the answer is I don't know. I have to think about it actually. And maybe there's other ways of understanding it. Based on this approach, that the Yidden were protected, they were in a different place, you have a very legitimate question, which you deserve an answer for. And right now, all I got is an IDK. I don't know. But Choshech was the exception. The Yidden went into the land of the Mitzrayim. And wherever they went, the light went with them. And that's why the Pasuk says, and the Jewish people light not just where they lived in Goshen. Wherever a Jew walked, the light went. And there was a reason why. And what was the reason? 1 second. What was the reason? Because the Moshe Rabbeinu, you have to understand something. And this is a very strange piece of the story. And there's actually a Gemara about this also. Moshe Rabbeinu, Avraham Avinu was promised hundreds of years earlier. Avraham Avinu was promised hundreds of years before. When Yidden leave their slavery, they're going to create great wealth. Right? The Jewish people leave their great wealth. So in the very beginning, in Shmais, 2 weeks ago, before the Makkah started, Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, oh, make sure the Jews borrow. Make sure the Jews borrow. When you get after Choshech, when you Choshech and Makkah's B'chaydes, Hashem tells Moshe, tell him again, borrow. And the Yidden went around and borrowed. And of course, they never gave it back. Whatever they borrowed, they took with them and they kept. And they would come into the Mitzrayim's homes. Even Moshe Rabbeinu himself was able to borrow quite a bit of wealth. People very happy to give. And of course, the kasha is to use an American cliche. Americans love to call Jews criminals, as the whole world does. If you're going to steal, steal upright. This Makkah's Choshech. They went into the habits of the Mitzrayim. They saw wealth. Take it. No, leave it. Come back tomorrow. You go to the Egyptian former master and you say, I need to have from you a gold tray or a gold goblet or a gold something other. I don't got it. I don't have. What do you mean? I was in your house. I saw it on the mountain. Yesterday I was in your house when you were sitting in the darkness. You couldn't move. I walked right by you. I made a funny face at you when I saw it. So the Midrashim say that the Mitzrayim gave them these kelim as loans because they saw their integrity. From a bench, he goes into your house. You're helpless to stop him. He can take whatever he wants. He doesn't touch. He just observes. Comes back the next day and says, I'd like to borrow it. So the Mitzrayim gave them loans. I got over here, Baruch Hashem, one of the honest people in the world who's worried about the Jewish people being dishonest, but Lapel didn't return it. They borrowed it for an indefinite period of time. So there's actually a Gemara about this. But there's a Gemara that when Alexander Smugdun came through the world, so the Egyptians came with a claim, 3 different people came with a claim that the Jews took their wealth. So the Chacham didn't know what to do. They came to Alexander the Great, who was passing through Eretz Yisrael, and they said, I forgot the man of the name. If somebody knows his name, you can help me out. They said the Jews stole all this wealth, and our proof is in their Bible. It's in their Bible that they took all of this wealth, and we want it back. So the Alexander Smugdun called the Chachamim and said, they got a claim, and they're quoting your Bible. So the Chacham got confused. So one old guy said, listen, let me represent you. If I lose, they'll say we lost to an old fool. If I win, so he had a din Torah judgment, and he said to Alexander Mukden, they're right, we did take that wealth, and we do owe it to them. But against that, there's another debt. And he counted up how many years of slavery, and how many hours of work, and how much money the Egyptians owe the Jews. Said, listen, we have to return all the silver and gold and jewels and wealth, and you learn is that in ancient Egypt, a shirt was more valuable than a keli made of gold, because in those days, to make fabric was much more difficult than it is today. Clay kesef, clay zav was smolis. The cheapest item it took was silver. The next most expensive item was gold, and more expensive than gold was outfits that were made of linen or wool or silk, as opposed to made of leather, of course, animal skins. And they said, we'll give them back. We have a cheshbon. We can all give them back, but they owe us a cheshbon back. And of course, you understand the numbers, how the numbers look. So he says, you pay us what you owe us for 200 years of slavery, and you can have back every pot and pound we ever took. And the Mitzrayim ran off, and the Gemara says it was a Shemitah year, and there was nothing to eat, and they left fields full of harvest. And Yidden had what did. There's 3 different stories from 3 different groups of people. All came to Alexander's Mukden, one after the other, and had a claim that the Jews owe money because we were quote unquote dishonest. And this Chevman said, no problem, let's talk business. We owe you, what do you owe us? And they all ran off. So that's the story, Mr. Levy. I'm happy that you're a very honorable person and you worry about Jewish people's integrity, but this is the truth of the matter, you understand? But the Eibishter wanted them to borrow. The Eibishter said, let's hold cheshbon. Let's hold cheshbon. I'm not going to take it. Let's have a cheshbon. So that one day you're going to come along and you want your claim back, so we'll give you a counterclaim, and we'll talk numbers, as they say in America, we'll talk numbers. So it says in this Hamafarshim, Midrashim, that the Makkah Choshe was rare, that it was not only in Goyishin. It was the only Makkah, or at least one of the only Makkahs that happened wherever Yidden went, because the Eibishter wanted the Jewish people to see the Egyptian wealth, not to take it, and wait till the lights came back on, and then to borrow it. The Jewish people would, like Rashi says, I told Avraham Avinu, his children are being enslaved, and that I fulfilled. I also told them that they're going to leave with great wealth. I want to fulfill that also, and therefore the Jewish people need to borrow. There's a Midrash which says a fascinating thing. That when the Eibishter created the world, the Eibishter made a separation between light and darkness. Now we know what the separation between light and darkness is. The separation between light and darkness that we know is when the sun comes up and the sun goes down. Which is not a separation of light and darkness, it's a separation of sun and no sun. But when the Eibishter created the world, there was not yet a sun. On Sunday, there was not yet a sun. The sun was created on Wednesday. So Hashem created light. No sun, light. And Hashem separate light from darkness. When Hashem separated light from darkness on day 1, it wasn't separating sun from no sun. It was light itself. So the Eibishter made a havdalah between light and darkness without a physical body to represent light, and without a physical body to represent darkness. It was a spiritual division, spiritual separation. So the Midrashim say that the Malachim came to the Eibishter when the Eibishter created the world and said, don't make people, you're only going to have tzaras. More energy siskirenu by aseres adibas. It says also, why are you going to make people? You're only going to make it tzaras. So the Eibishter, when I made my world, I made a separation between light and darkness without a sun and without a moon. I'm creating people because one day in the future, some of these people are going to create a separation between light and darkness, and it has nothing to do with the sun and the moon. The theoretical light, in other words, 2 people be in the same place at the same time. One person has light, the other person has darkness. This is similarly, it's a throwback. It's the Havdalah between Yen and Cheshach that the Eibishter created before there was the sun and the moon. And the Eibishter says to the Malachim, I need people for this. That one day they should come along and make the separation in darkness without the help of the sun and the moon. It's a very interesting medrash. And that's the meaning of the whole B'nai Yisrael, or Meshvais of the Eibishter created the world, the created Yidden, to effect that there could be light for one person and darkness for another person, same time, same place, same conditions. Now, of course, Rashi says several things. That the Eibishter wanted that the Jewish people should be able to bury their Rishonim without the Mitzrayim seeing. So there had to be light, even though Mitzrayim had darkness, because we know that some Yidden died in Mitzrayim, and according to Rashi, there could have been many, many, many Yidden died in Mitzrayim. And they died during the 3 days of Makas Choshech when the Mitzrayim were not able to see or even hear. So they shouldn't see the shame of the Jewish people. So this is why this darkness had to be. And the pasuk has to say, L'chol b'nei Yisrael, that the Jewish people should be able to bury their dead. And of course, you know what the Rebbe says in all of the Sichos. Ilu haya sham lo haya nigel. In Mitzrayim, some of the Yidden died and didn't leave. When Mashiach is going to come, the Eibush is going to figure out, or every single Jew is going to be Yitzim in Mitzrayim. There's not going to be one Jew left behind in Galus. The worst Russia, the Eibush is going to find a way of redeeming him and taking him out of Galus. And then the Rashi's second Pirush is the one we know from all the Midrashim, that the Yidden looked for the wealth of the Egyptians. Now, I don't got a lot of time, so I'm going to go straight one more Vart and then the Sikha. Okay? The Chassam Sofer has a very interesting insight. It's a very practical insight. The Chassam Sofer's insight is that the Eibishter wanted to punish the Egyptians with darkness. He doesn't have to make any miracles. He has to just blind them. Just like in Sodom. When the Malachim came to Sodom, they blinded the people of Sodom. So the Eibishter wants to make it dark in Mitzrayim is to blind them. Why does he have to make a whole Maisa that there's a darkness and that there's a heavy darkness, they can't move, they can't see? Hashem just blinded Mitzrayim and finished. So he gives a very, very practical and almost like a psychological pirush. The Chassam Sofer says like this: there's a human nature that when a person is missing one of the five senses, his other senses automatically become stronger and they compensate. A person who's blind can hear better and smell better and touch better. A person who's deaf notices things more, he feels vibrations. If a person is missing one of the senses, he compensates the other sense. So the Eibishter would blind Mitzrayim, they would become proficient with the other senses, to hear better and to smell better. So the Eibishter did not blind them. He put them in a state of darkness. So they should strain their eyes. Not only did the darkness not affect an improvement of the other senses, it exhausted their visual sense. They were trying, their eyes worked, and they were trying so hard to see in the darkness, so there was no gain. It's a word from the Chassam Sofer. I think it's an interesting word. That means that the Mitzrayim did not lose their ability to see. There was no light as far as they were concerned, and this affected that the Mitzrayim should try to see and not be able to see, so there'd be no benefit from it. Now comes the Rebbe's Sikha. And the Rebbe argues with these Midrashim. The Rebbe says, during the Makas Choshech, it was dark for the Mitzrayim, it was not dark for the Yidden. But he disagrees with all the ideas that the fact that it wasn't dark for the Yidden was a separate ness. Meaning to say, you could say according to Rashi, that it was night, the Yidden couldn't see either. The Mitzrayim had darkness, and the Yidden had whatever they had before. There was no miracle for Yidden to see extra. Yidden's ability to see remained during Makas Choshech as it was at any other time. There was no miracle to help Yidden see in darkness at all. Why? He says, why? Because Yidden had a mitzvah. What was the mitzvah? The mitzvah was to go into the Egyptian houses, to look for the wealth, and later claim it. And we all know the story with the Alter Rebbe that you're not allowed to do a mitzvah using a nes. Remember the Alter Rebbe wanted to be Mechadash the Levana, so he told the Russian fellow on the little ship that was taking him from the Pevels to Krepes to the mainland to stop. So he be Mechadash the Levana. The guy refused, so that the Alter Rebbe made the boat stop by itself. And after the boat stopped for a while, the boat started to go again. He asked the guy, would you stop the boat yourself? And the guy agreed. If the Alter Rebbe would give him a bracha b'ksav. So the Friedrich says in the Sikh, if the Alter Rebbe was able to stop the boat, why did he have to have the guy stop it? And the Rebbe answered, because if the boat would stop because of a miracle, you can't be Mechadash Levana with a nes. So the guy had to stop it b'derech hateva and not Mechadash Levana. Yidden had a mitzvah to collect wealth from the Egyptians. The moment it became a mitzvah, it had to be done b'derech hateva. If you hold that during Makas Choshech, l'chol b'nei Yisrael ha'or b'Yisrael meant that there was a special miracle of light, as the Midrashim say, you are saying that the Yidden were doing this mitzvah, doing the preliminary stage of this mitzvah, using a Maisa Nisim, using a miracle, and you're not allowed to do it. So that the spins Rashi, the whole 180 degrees the opposite. That there was no specialness. If I can't The meaning of the words doesn't mean that there was a special miracle. It means that there was no special miracle. The Jewish people had just like every other day. There was nothing unusual about the day and night cycle as far as the Jewish people were concerned. And the light that they had during Machas Choshech was the same light they had the days before, the same light had the days after. Hashem did not make a separate ness that the Jewish people should be able to see in the dark. In Mitzrayim they were able to see because for them there was no darkness. The sun was shining. The Egyptians couldn't see. But Yidden's ability to see in Mitzrayim was not an ness. It had to be Davka b'derech hateva, because the Yidden were doing a mitzvah. And the mitzvah was preparing to be able to collect the wealth of the Egyptians by borrowing so that there could be a cheshbon, and 1,000 years later they'd be able to take the cheshbon, and we would turn out that the Egyptians still owe us agavalt. Okay? The Rebbe has a deeper pshat, a god atifa pshat, where the Rebbe says that there is teva, and then there is nes, and then there is even higher than nes. Teva means nature. Nes means the miracle. Higher than the miracles, we live in a world where what God wants becomes natural. And the Rebbe wants to suggest that that may have been the situation for the Yidden in Mitzrayim during Machas Choshech. The Rebbe explains why the Midrashim disagree. The Medrash holds that there was a special nest that Yidden could see in the darkness because before Matan Torah, mitzvahs had different rules than after Matan Torah for shidden reasons. Okay, but in Rashi, the Rebbe holds punkt. The meaning of the words that there was no special nest for Yidden to be able to see in the darkness. But then the Rebbe says that however you're going to spin it, whether you're going to spin it like Rashi, that there was no special nest, or you're going to spin it like the Medrash, that there was a special nest you could see in the darkness. The fact was that the Mitzrayim had darkness, and the Yidden were able to see. And there's a lesson in this. And the lesson of this is that the last days and hours of Galus, Yidden all over the world experience, compared to the earlier times in Galus, a light, and it allows them to finish the work of the Galus. One of the jobs of the Galus is to elevate sparks, is to take wealth, spiritual wealth. So at the very end of the Galus, the Jewish people's lives are made much easier materially, so that they're able to accrue wealth, able to take wealth from the world, means the Ruch needs to take a wealth. And the Rebbe talks about this quite passionately, the idea that we live in times that the Jewish people's lives are materially much better than they've ever been. Now, I heard that Siach from the Rebbe before the Soviet Union collapsed. When I was a bacher, when I was a young man, the Soviet Union might as well have been the moon. It was so inaccessible. It was so impossible to think about penetrating that Iron Curtain. And since that time, the Iron Curtain disappeared completely. And in Russia, even now, as we speak, that there's a war going on. I met a guy in the oil this morning, a good friend of mine, who says he was in Mezhebush, no problem. He was in the United Ukraine, no problem. Even now, as we speak, in Mitten Milchama, Jewish people in these places are so safe. There's a famous Jew. Again, you don't know this because you were born too late. His name is Natan Sharansky. Natan Sharansky is a very important, in Israel, he's a very important man, politician. I don't think Natan Sharansky is from. Natan Sharansky sat many, many years in jail. He was a refusenik. And when the war between Russia and the Ukraine started, there was a place where the Jews were allowed to leave the Ukraine to go into another one of these countries. He, as a representative of Israel, went there to greet the Jewish people and to make accommodations for them, to give them food, to give them clothing, to give them shelter. And he said, I grew up, and everybody had a passport. And they would look at your passport, and if the word Jew was written, you were automatically not able to advance. You know, they called the Russian glass ceiling. You couldn't go past a certain point. And now, people come to the border with a passport, and the only people they're letting through are the people with the Jewish passports. For you to look at your life and to get caught up in all the hype about anti-Semitism and all this garbage, I don't care if you believe me or not, but I want to tell it to you straight. The Jews haven't had it this good since Churban Bayesheni. This minute, 2024, in the middle of this war in Israel, and the way our president is acting is beyond anybody's dreams. The president of the United States. It's a pella she'en kamoyu. And I don't think the pella is Biden. I think the pella is Netanyahu. And the Jewish people are finally acting like Jews. respecting themselves, that please, please, please like me, please, please say I'm a good person, please, please don't say I'm a bad person. Chavre, you have to open up your eyes. Study a little Jewish history. We are living in incredible times. You're living Erev the Gula Mitzvah Vashleima. I don't know this because of wars. I don't know this because of newspapers. I know this because of the Rebbe. I grew up around the Rebbe. And he brainwashed me. And if God will help me, I should brainwash one of you. I'll be an amazing success. But one of the things that the Rebbe spoke about the imminence of the coming of Mashiach, about our time, is how well Jewish people are doing all over the world. If you just be honest and don't get swept away by noise and by people, anti-Semitism. It's true, there is anti-Semitism. It's always been anti-Semitism. But anti-Semitism becomes a monster when we make it into a monster. The Jewish people are doing incredibly well everywhere in the world, better than they've ever done. And this is one of the simanim of Mashiach, according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't know if you're a follower of his or what it was, you're an ex-Lubi, your father was, your grandfather was, but according to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the simanim of Mashiach is this pasuk on which this class is based. The last tag that they're going for Galus is lichtik. It's lichtik. And I live with this, I do. And when people who I consider, who I respect, come to me with all their pessimism, I don't understand. You heard these sikhs. What happened? And they don't know what to say. What they really want to say is, well, that was wrong. Well, that was a long time ago, and then since then was a Gimel Tammuz. All these Baba Maises. If the Rebbe is a Rebbe, it's true. If it's not a Rebbe, it never was true. Wasn't true yesterday. If it's not true today, it wasn't true yesterday. And if it's true, yes, it's true today. I would like you to just do the research, but with an open mind. And if you study Jewish history, what the Jewish people went through in the last 2,000 years, that's 200 years, that's 100 years. We're living in bad times. The times are so amazing. But we, Baruch Hashem, Jews need to have a problem. You know, one of the Jews, I call it the Anne Frank syndrome. Jewish people, if they have a problem, they're incredibly optimistic. Anne Frank was trying to explain how the Nazis are really good people. Chas v'shalom, a Jew doesn't have a problem, if life is perfect, he makes them up. The problem with the problem the Jew makes up, they can't fix it because they're not real. But a Jew needs a problem. A Jew cannot chas v'shalom have a good life. It's impossible. He's got to be miserable. So if the guy hates him and punches him, oh, Baruch Hashem, I'm alive. But Baruch Hashem, he didn't kill me, he just smashed my nose. And the Jews always find a positive spin on their tzaddas. But if there's no tzaddah, the Jew invents one. And that's such a disease. It's such a makas medina. You have to understand, there are Jews in this world who are not from. In principle, not from, right? So what is their Judaism? The Holocaust, the state of Israel, and anti-Semitism. But the state of Israel became a bad place. Why? BDS, Shlita, and there's a lot of Jews who are caught up in that whole disease. Israel, I have a former student who said to me, she came home from school to her family in Australia, and they wouldn't talk to her because she's an evil woman. She doesn't stand up for the Palestinians. 20 years ago. So if you can't have Israel, state of Israel is a bad country. The Holocaust is too long ago to think about it anymore. So what's left? You have to find somebody who hates you, and you point, oh, anti-Semite, anti-Semite. It creates the Jew's identity. You don't need the anti-Semite. The Jew needs to be able to point his finger at somebody. The Jews have a reason. You know what makes me a Jew? I called you an anti-Semite. But we're from, for heaven's sakes. We don't need anti-Semitism to be Jewish. We have Shabbos and kosher and mikveh and tefillin. And if you're through, we can put in a tam tefillin, you can cholav Yisrael, and pas Yisrael, and bishul Yisrael, and glad kosher. And there's so many things you can do to identify the Jew without having to be miserable. And it makes me crazy when I hear people who I respect get caught up in this pessimist negativity. It's so un-Lubavitch. It is so un-Lubavitch. It's so un-Lubavitch. I tell my students all the slots for the Morosh Chayrikas are filled. The Lubavitchers are positive people because the Rebbe is a positive man. It's on us to get into our heads that the Lubavitcher Rebbe don't make no mistakes. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe didn't say things for a period of time which has passed. This is Nevuah Mamish. L'chol b'nei Yisrael l'ha'or b'shveisim is me and you now. I said, lichtik. We're living in a very good time. It will be a really good idea if we can take our heads out of the stupid newspapers, and I'm saying that rather than saying a 3-letter word you're not allowed to say in a shul, and be positive people. L'chaim v'levracha, good nacht.